There is a specific kind of silence that only happens once in a generation. Not the silence of an empty room, not the silence of awkwardness or uncertainty. This is the silence that falls when something so undeniably true enters a space that the air itself stops pretending. The kind of silence that makes grown men put down their champagne glasses and forget, for 3 impossible seconds, what they were about to say. That silence happened on a Thursday night in Columbus, Ohio, and the woman who caused it was holding a water pitcher. She had no idea, not yet, that the man who had mocked her was the father of her child. She had no idea that the woman sitting 2 seats to his left had been lying to both of them for 5 years. She had no idea that a journalist in New York had already started making calls. And she had no idea that, by the time the weekend ended, her entire life would have to be rebuilt from the ground up, and that this time she would be the one holding the blueprints. All she knew, in that specific moment, was that someone had told her to perform for their amusement, and she had made a different choice. This is the story of Zara Cole, a story about what happens when the world bets everything on a woman staying silent and loses. Zara does not remember the exact morning she stopped grieving the career she was supposed to have. She thinks it was sometime in the winter, after Amara turned 2. A Tuesday, maybe, when she was folding laundry at 11 at night with a cold cup of tea on the windowsill and the conservatory brochure still somehow wedged between her cookbooks. She had pulled it out, and I looked at it for a long moment. The glossy cover, the photograph of a young soprano mid-phrase, mouth open, eyes closed, completely surrendered to something larger than herself. And then she had used it to level the wobbly leg of her kitchen table. It worked perfectly. That was the night Zara decided that the version of her life she had planned was not the version she was living, and that the sooner she stopped treating her actual life as a waiting room for the real one, the better off her daughter would be. She had grown up in East Columbus, the only child of Loretta Cole, a church choir director with a voice like warm wood and a philosophy about music that Zara had carried into every room she'd ever entered. Baby, your voice doesn't belong to anyone who can't afford to hear it properly. But that doesn't mean you stop singing. Loretta had died of a stroke when Zara was 24, 1 year before graduation, 2 years before everything that would follow. Zara had finished her degree anyway, had walked across that stage with grief sitting quietly in her chest like a held note, and had accepted the scholarship prize in her mother's honor, and had cried in the parking lot for 45 minutes before driving herself home. She had tried. That part matters. She had sent recordings, attended every open audition, cultivated relationships with agents and managers who praised her in meetings and never returned her follow-up calls. She had learned, slowly and then all at once, that the classical music world had a particular architecture, and that its doors, however beautiful, were not designed with her dimensions in mind. And then she had discovered she was pregnant. The father was a man she had met at a rooftop party in New York during a weekend trip with a college friend. He had been charming in the way that certain men are charming when they are not operating in their professional environment. Relaxed, funny, seemingly unguarded. They had talked for 3 hours. He had kissed her near the stairwell just before midnight. She had given him her number. He had never called. She had not known his last name until much, much later. By the time she found out who he really was, she was already 4 months along, already back in Columbus, already past the point where the information could reshape anything cleanly. And when she had reached out, carefully, through a channel a friend suggested, she had received a response, not from him, Waitress, but from a woman identifying herself as a representative of the Voss family, who had offered her a very specific amount of money for a very specific silence, and who had made very clear what the alternative would look like. Zara had not taken the money, but she had gone quiet, not because she was afraid of the Voss name, but because she was 25 years old, alone, grieving her mother, and newly understanding that some battles, fought too early, do not save you. They simply drain you before the real fight begins. So she had raised Amara. She had built a life with the precise, stubborn craftsmanship of someone who refuses to let difficult circumstances become their identity. She had made friends, built community, found a rhythm. Oh, she waited tables at the Harrington Grand because the tips were good, and the schedule was flexible, and her manager, a kind woman named Petra, never made her feel small. Most days, Zara Cole was fine. Some nights, the nights when Amara asked questions she wasn't ready for, or when she passed a concert hall and heard something floating through the ventilation and stopped walking without meaning to, she was something other than fine. But she kept moving. That was her whole philosophy. Keep moving. Keep the back straight. Hold the note until you're ready to release it. She had been holding a very particular note for 5 years. The Harrington Grand does not look like a place where lives change. It looks exactly like what it is, a monument to the kind of wealth that stopped needing to prove itself several generations ago. Thus the ceilings are 22 feet high and coffered in white plaster. The chandeliers are not replicas. The marble floors were imported, a fact the venue's website mentions with the specific pride of an institution that has confused expense with significance. The staff entrance is around the back, past the loading dock, through a door that does not have a handle on the outside. Zara had used that door for 3 years. She knew every inch of the venue, the way you know any place you've been invisible in for long enough. Intimately, practically, without sentiment. She knew which tables tilted. She knew the acoustics of the main hall made conversation difficult, past a certain decibel, and that guests at the east end of the room always felt neglected, if you didn't make an extra pass every 12 minutes. She knew that the private event clientele were, on average, less polite than the wedding clientele, and that the corporate dinners were the worst of all. Rooms full of people performing success for each other, with no one to perform it for except the staff, who were supposed to be invisible enough to serve as a safe audience. The Nexum Capital post-merger dinner had been on the books for 6 weeks. Petra had pulled Zara aside that morning to let her know it was a high-profile event. "The Voss family will be there," she had said, in a tone that suggested this information was relevant. Zara had nodded. She had filed the name in the part of her brain she reserved for things she was not going to think about until she absolutely had to. She had pinned her hair back, pressed her uniform. Yerksen showed up at 4:30 for the pre-service briefing. She had not known, walking through the back door, that the thing she had been holding for 5 years was about to surface. She had not known that fate had been planning this room. The dinner began at 7. By 8, the wine had been flowing for long enough that the professional masks had begun to slip. Not off entirely, but loose, the way masks get when people are comfortable in their cruelty. The conversation at Table 1, Dominic Voss's table, had that particular texture of men entertaining themselves with their own opinions. Each one slightly louder than the last. Each one slightly less interested in being challenged. Zara worked Table 1 from the far end, refilling water glasses with the efficiency of someone who has turned invisibility into a professional skill. Till she noticed him the way you notice weather. Not with interest, but with awareness. He was broad-shouldered and angular, with the controlled stillness of someone accustomed to being the gravitational center of every room. His suit was the color of slate, and it had clearly been made specifically for his body. He held his champagne glass with the casual security of a man who had never once worried about who would pay for it. She did not recognize him. She would. The conversation had turned to opera, specifically to whether classical music still had cultural relevance, a topic being debated with the authority of men who had not attended a classical performance since their parents dragged them as children. Someone said the Midwest was a cultural graveyard. Someone else agreed. Laughter moved around the table like a ball being passed. And then, Dominic Voss looked at Zara. It was not the first time a man at one of these tables had looked at her as though she were part of the room's decor, rather than a person inside it. She recognized the look. She had a very precise internal response to it, refined over years, straighten the back, maintain the neutral expression, finish the task, move on. But Dominic did not look away. He set his glass down with a small, deliberate click. You. The word landed like a thrown object. The table went quiet, with the specific quiet of people, anticipating entertainment at someone else's expense. Zara turned. She met his eyes without flinching, and something in that, the absence of flinching, seemed to interest and irritate him in equal measure. He gestured at her with the slow, uncomfortable arc of a man who had never once been told his gestures were unwelcome. You look like you have opinions about music. A ripple of laughter. Tell you what. He leaned back in his chair, the posture of a man who owned the chair, the table, the room, possibly the building. Sing me something from Mozart. Properly. He paused for effect. And I'll marry you. The laughter that followed was not small. It was the laugh of a table that had been given permission. The laugh of people who had decided the premise was safe because the target was a black woman in a uniform holding a water pitcher in a room she had entered through a door with no outside handle. The joke assumed she would have nothing. The joke assumed she would disappear. The joke was the worst miscalculation Dominic Voss had ever made. And he had made some significant ones. Zara set the water pitcher down on the nearest surface, with a steadiness that felt, in retrospect, like the stillness before a very particular kind of storm. She did not look around the room. She did not look at the laughing faces. She did not perform nervousness, or seek reassurance, or calculate the professional consequences. She looked at Dominic Voss, found him entirely insufficient, and opened her mouth. The piece was Ach, ich fühl's, Pamina's aria from Mozart's The Magic Flute, an aria about grief, about love that has gone cold and silent and wrong, about a woman standing in the ruins of something she believed in, choosing to feel it fully rather than look away. Zara did not perform it, she inhabited it. And the first note rose from her chest like something that had been waiting, not just for this moment, but for years. Clean and round and devastatingly precise, it moved through the marble hall with the certainty of something that belonged there, had always belonged there, had simply been waiting for the room to be ready. Her German was flawless. Her breath control was surgical. Her tone had the quality that only genuine training layered over genuine grief can produce. The quality of something earned rather than manufactured. The laughter died within 4 seconds, not politely, abruptly, like a light switched off. The woman at the far end of the table, a senior partner, poised and unsentimental, pressed 2 fingers slowly to her lips, and did not move them for the duration. Then a man who had been constructing a narrative about his golf handicap stopped mid-sentence and simply forgot where he was. two servers near the service entrance stood motionless, holding things they had forgotten were in their hands. The sommelier, halfway through decanting a 2019 Burgundy, stopped pouring and watched the wine suspend in the bottle's neck, like it too was listening. Dominic Voss sat with his champagne glass raised halfway to his mouth. He did not complete the movement for 2 full minutes. He had heard trained voices before. His family had box seats at the Metropolitan Opera. He had sat through performances by singers whose names appeared on the sides of concert halls. He understood, technically, what excellence sounded like. This was not technical excellence. This was something that reminded him, in a way he was not prepared for and could not immediately process, that music existed before money did. That certain things in this world could not be acquired or commissioned or scheduled. That there were frequencies of human expression that bypassed every category he had built around himself and reached something underneath, something younger and less defended and entirely inconvenient. He felt it in his sternum. He felt it like a fist. Zara finished. The room held 3 full seconds of silence. The silence that is not empty, but loaded. The silence that means something has happened that cannot be taken back. Then the applause broke. Genuine, disorganized. The sound of people who had not planned to clap and were doing it anyway because their hands had made the decision independently. Zara looked at Dominic Voss one final time, and he was still holding the champagne glass. His face had done something complicated and unresolved, something she would think about later, something she didn't have language for yet. He looked, for the first time since she'd entered the room, like a man who wasn't sure what he was. "I'll show myself out," she said, and she walked to the service exit without looking back. She was 3 blocks from the Harrington Grand in the November cold, her breath visible in the streetlight, when her phone lit up with an unknown number. She ignored it. It called again and again. On the 4th call, she answered, not because she was curious, because something in her chest had started a low, a warning hum that she recognized from the 2 or 3 times in her life when the universe had been trying to tell her something she wasn't going to be able to outrun. The voice on the other end was not Dominic Voss. It was a woman, careful, professional. The exact vocal register of someone who had been trained to deliver information while revealing as little as possible. "Ms. Cole," the woman said, "my name is Shelby Voss Carraway. We've spoken before." Zara stopped walking. The cold pressed against her face. A car passed. The city made its indifferent noise around her. Yes, they had spoken before. 5 years ago, from a number she had long since deleted. The woman who had offered her money. The woman who had explained, in terms both generous and threatening, what silence was worth, and what noise would cost. "I don't have anything to say to you," Zara said. "I know," Shelby replied. "But you're going to want to hear what I'm about to tell you. Because someone else already has." The pause that followed was 3 seconds long. "A journalist," Shelby continued, "has your name, a photograph from that rooftop in New York, and documentation of the transfer I made to your account 5 years ago, which you never cashed, but which they have records of regardless. They are publishing Friday." Zara said nothing. "The story they're publishing," Shelby said, and her voice had shifted, just barely, just enough, from professional to something that sounded almost like fear, "is not the story I managed for 5 years. It's worse, and it doesn't just expose you." Another pause. "It exposes me. The thing about a 5-year secret is that it has had 5 years to grow roots. Shelby Voss Carraway had been 31 when Dominic came home from that New York weekend looking, for the first time in years, like a man who had been genuinely moved by something. She had noticed. She always noticed. Her entire professional function, and, if she was being honest with herself, her entire personal function, was to notice things about Dominic before Dominic noticed them himself. She had not told him about Zara's call because she had made a calculation. A woman, a pregnancy, an inconvenient complication. These things were managed. That was what she did. She managed things. And she had been managing the Voss family's complicated landscape since she was 19 years old, and her uncle had first handed her a problem that needed to disappear. What she had not calculated, what she had catastrophically underestimated, was Zara Cole herself. Because Zara had not taken the money. And a woman who doesn't take the money is a woman who is not finished. Shelby had filed this information and told herself it didn't matter. That silence without payment was still silence, that the distance between Columbus and New York was sufficient insulation. She had been wrong about the distance. She had been wrong about almost everything. The journalist had found the photograph, a candid from a rooftop party, Dominic and Zara near a stairwell, his hand at her waist, both of them caught mid-laugh in the easy, so unguarded way of two people who don't know they're being photographed. It was a beautiful photograph. It was also undeniably a photograph of the CEO of Nexum Capital, with a woman he had publicly claimed never to have met. The journalist had the transfer records. The journalist had a source. Someone inside the Voss organization. Someone who had known about the arrangement for years and had recently decided that loyalty had an expiration date. The journalist had, through channels Shelby could not immediately identify, a copy of Amara's birth certificate. 72 hours. That was how long until publication. Shelby had called Zara first. She had not called Dominic yet. That was the detail. The one small, self-interested, ultimately catastrophic detail that would end her. Amara Cole was 5 years old and had inherited, from a woman she would never know she was connected to, a particular quality of stillness. She could sit with a thing, a question, a feeling, a half-understood observation, for longer than most children, turning it over in her small hands like a stone she was trying to understand. She had been sitting with a particular question for several months. She asked it on a Friday morning, the morning after the aria, while Zara was making oatmeal and trying very hard not to think about the phone call that had kept her awake until 3 a.m. "Mama," Amara said from the kitchen table, with the specific seriousness of a child who has rehearsed the question internally and decided it was finally time. "How come I don't have a daddy?" Zara's hand stopped stirring. The kitchen was very quiet. The oatmeal made small, patient sounds. Outside, not a garbage truck worked its way down the block. She turned around and looked at her daughter. The dark eyes, the deliberate posture, the face that was, if you knew where to look, not entirely Zara's face, and felt something move through her chest that was not grief and not love and not anger, but some dense, complicated compound of all three. She sat down across from Amara. She said nothing for a long moment. "You have me," she finally said, "and that's not a small thing." Amara considered this with the seriousness it deserved. "I know," she said, "but Jalen at school has a daddy who comes to pick up, and Maya has one too, and Jordan has two." A pause. "Do I have one somewhere?" Zara looked at her daughter's face and made a decision. Not about what to say. Not yet. She wasn't ready for that yet. And the truth wasn't fully assembled. And some truths need to be whole before you hand them to a 5-year-old. The decision she made was simpler and more fundamental than that. She decided she was done being quiet. Not loud, she had never been loud, but done with the particular quiet that had been imposed on her. Done with the arrangement, done with the distance, done with the idea that protecting Amara meant protecting the people who had made it necessary. She picked up her phone. She did not call Shelby back. She called a lawyer. By Saturday morning, the ground under the Voss organization had begun to shift in ways that Shelby could feel but not yet locate. Dominic had not slept. He had not slept because he could not stop hearing the aria. Not as a performance. He had processed it as a performance within the first hour. Wakibe. He could not stop hearing it as something else entirely, as evidence of a specific kind of person, a specific quality of character, and as the uncomfortable realization that he had treated that person with a casual cruelty that he was not, upon reflection, comfortable with. He was not a man who spent significant time in self-examination. His life had been constructed, through a combination of inheritance and effort, to minimize the amount of time he needed to spend on it. Systems handled things. People handled things. Shelby handled things. But Shelby had been strange on Saturday morning, clipped, distracted, checking her phone with a frequency that broke her usual seamless professional composure. And something in that irregularity had tripped a wire in Dominic's well-calibrated attention. "What's happening?" he had asked her. In the direct, minimal way, he asked everything. "Nothing that requires your attention today," she had said. He had let it go. He almost never let things go, twice. On Sunday afternoon, he found the photograph. Not through Shelby, not through his own team. He found it because a college friend, an entertainment lawyer in New York who had been at that rooftop party, had texted him a link to a private social archive page, a page belonging to the photographer who had shot the party, who had quietly and without announcement uploaded several hundred archival images from that evening to a portfolio site. Dominic sat in his home office in Bexley and looked at the photograph for a long time. The woman in it, her head turned slightly, mid-laugh, his hand at her waist, was unmistakably the woman from Thursday night, the woman who had sung the aria, on the woman he had mocked in front of 30 people. He sat with that for 60 seconds of complete silence, the second silence of this story, the private kind, the kind with no audience. Then he called Shelby. She did not answer. She did not answer because she was, at that moment, in a conference room with her own attorney, attempting to construct a narrative in which her role in the 5-year suppression of a paternity situation could be reframed as protective rather than predatory. She was failing. Her attorney kept asking her questions she did not have good answers to. Dominic called again and again. On the fourth call, he used the secondary line, the line reserved for genuine emergencies, the number only 3 people had. And Shelby answered. He said one sentence. "Tell me about Zara Cole." The silence that followed, the third silence of this story, lasted 60 seconds. It was, in those 60 seconds, the sound of a 5-year lie deciding whether it was strong enough to survive one more day. It was not. The truth, once it began moving, moved fast. Dominic's attorneys confirmed the birth certificate within 6 hours. The dates aligned. The timeline was unambiguous. Amara Loretta Cole, middle name after her maternal grandmother, was 5 years old and was, by every legal and biological measure, his daughter. He had a daughter. He had a 5-year-old daughter who had been asking her mother about fathers, who brought her oatmeal in the morning and took her to kindergarten and sang to her at night with a voice that could stop rooms. And he had not known. See, he had not known because someone he trusted, someone he had given extraordinary access and authority, had decided the information was inconvenient and had made it disappear. The full document that Shelby's own attorney inadvertently provided in the disclosure process detailed everything: the initial call from Zara's friend, Shelby's interception, the financial offer, Zara's refusal, and, most damningly, a series of text messages from Shelby to an associate in which she discussed ongoing management of the Columbus situation, as recently as 8 months ago. She had been managing it. She had been managing it continuously, monitoring, making sure the silence held. Dominic read the document in its entirety. He did not speak for 60 seconds. His assistant, on who had worked for him for 7 years and had seen him navigate hostile takeovers and congressional inquiries and the death of his father, said later that she had never seen his face look like that, like something had been removed from it, like the composure was still there, but the foundation beneath it had changed composition entirely. He terminated Shelby's employment at 9:47 p.m. on Sunday. He instructed his personal attorney to reach out to Zara's attorney, whom she had retained efficiently and precisely 36 hours earlier, at first light on Monday. And then he sat alone in his office for a long time. He thought about the rooftop party. He thought about a woman mid-laugh who had talked to him for 3 hours without knowing who he was, and had seemed in that specific window of anonymity, so to see something in him he rarely got to be. He thought about Thursday night, about the joke, about the crystalline cruelty of the assumption he had made without a second's hesitation. He thought about a 5-year-old girl he had never met, who had her grandmother's name in the middle of hers. He thought about what the word deserve meant, and who, in this entire story, had actually earned it. There is a particular kind of mourning that only comes once in a life. Not the morning after triumph. Not the morning after devastation. The morning after you have looked at yourself clearly, without the architecture of ego and convenience and carefully maintained distance, and decided to be something different, something more honest, something that costs more than what you've been paying so far. Zara Cole's attorney called her at 7 a.m. on Monday. The offer from the Voss legal team was comprehensive. Recognition of paternity, a trust for Amara's education, health care, and future, a full retraction of any non-disclosure arrangement, legally dissolved, unenforceable, void, an acknowledgement, in writing, that Zara had neither accepted nor agreed to the arrangement Shelby had constructed. There was also, attached to the offer, a handwritten note, not from an attorney, from Dominic. It was 4 sentences long. Zara read it standing in her kitchen. Amara still asleep in the next room, the morning coming through the window the way it does in November, low and honest and without sentiment. She read it twice. She set it down on the table. She picked it up and read it again. Then she went to the window and stood there for a while, watching the street come awake, the garbage truck, the dog walkers, the school buses beginning their routes. And she thought about her mother, and about the stage she had never stood on, and about the aria she had sung 3 nights ago to a room full of people who had decided she didn't belong there. She thought about Amara asking about fathers over oatmeal. She thought about the note. It was not a love story yet. She was clear-eyed enough to know that. It was not a resolution or a redemption or a neat closing of an open wound. It was something smaller and more honest than that. It was a man who had finally been shown who he was, and had, for possibly the first time in his life, not looked away. That was not enough. Not on its own. But it was something. Zara Cole had built an entire life out of something. So she folded the note carefully and placed it between the pages of the cookbook that shared a shelf with where the conservatory brochure used to be. Then she went to wake up her daughter. The journalist published the story on Friday. It was not the story Shelby had feared. The journalist, operating, it turned out, with a stronger ethical compass than anyone in the situation had anticipated, had given both Zara and Dominic the opportunity to engage before publication. What ran was not a scandal piece. It was something more layered than that. A story about a woman of extraordinary talent who had been systematically sidelined, about the institutional machinery that protects certain kinds of power, and about what happens when that machinery makes the miscalculation of assuming that silence is permanent. And Zara's name was attached to a recording. The aria from Thursday night, captured on someone's phone, uploaded without her knowledge, already circulating privately, was included in the piece with her permission. By Monday, the recording had been heard by 4 million people. By Tuesday, her inbox contained requests from 2 major opera companies, a recording label, and a documentary production team. By Wednesday, a retired conductor in Vienna, a man who had wept at her senior recital, who had kept in touch through the years with the specific fidelity of someone who believes in what they heard and refuses to let it disappear, sent her a single message. "I told you," it said. "I told you." Fate does not ask permission. That is the first thing you learn when you stop trying to negotiate with it. It does not ask whether you are ready. So it does not ask whether the timing is convenient, or the circumstances are clean, or the people involved deserve what's coming. It simply moves. Through rooms, through years, through the spaces between one person's cruelty and another person's extraordinary refusal to be diminished by it. And it arrives, eventually, at the truth. Always the truth. Zara Cole did not set out to change anything on a Thursday night in November. She set out to do her job, go home to her daughter, and get through another day with the back straight and the note held. But fate had been planning that room for 5 years, and Zara, finally, fully, without apology, had shown up for it. The note Dominic wrote her said 4 things. It said, "I remember the rooftop." It said, "I did not know. I need you to know that I did not know." It said, "I would like to meet my daughter, if you will allow it, on whatever terms you decide." And it said, "I am sorry for Thursday. Not because of what I found out afterward. Because of what I did before I knew anything. Because of what I assumed. That was mine. That belongs to me." Zara had read those 4 sentences 3 times. She had not forgiven him. Not yet. Forgiveness is not a Thursday night decision. It is a long road walked in the particular direction of your own freedom, not his. But she had recognized something in those sentences. She had recognized a man trying, maybe for the first time, to say a true thing. And Zara Cole, daughter of Loretta, mother of Amara, soprano, graduate, survivor, and the woman who had leveled a wobbly table with a dream and kept the kitchen standing, had built her entire life on the understanding that true things, however late they arrived, were worth more than easy things delivered on time. She would decide about Dominic later. She would decide about a lot of things later. Right now, Amara was awake and calling from the next room, and the morning was coming through the window. And somewhere in Vienna, a conductor was telling her what she had always known. She went to her daughter,